welcome to another episode of The Invisible Men. Ian, how are you, my friend?
I'm great. Nique, as always, good to see you. What are we talking about?
We are talking about an editorial in the Wall Street Journal today from our friend, Roland Fryer, titled The Economics of DEI and Merit. And I got to read the first two sentences. DEI is dying. MEI is the new corporate rage, standing for merit, excellence, and intelligence.
Wow. So, because, DEI, I've said this before, stood for division, exclusion, and intolerance.
I've not heard you say that. I like that a lot.
So we have some more alphabet soup. Can't we just, all right. So MEI, do you remember, what was it, The Wiz? Remember the film The Wiz, and the guys like, the color is orange, but now the color is black. So, okay, out with DEI, in with MEI.
In with MEI.
All right, so what's
merit, excellence, and intelligence.
Okay. I mean, that's good. Merit, excellence, and intelligence. I think that's good.
He goes on to quote, and he references another one of our friends who's been on the show several times, Glenn Lowry,
right?
And
I was just going to say, it does actually matter what these words mean, because diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? The word diversity unto itself is not a bad thing. The word inclusion unto itself is not a bad thing. It's all in how these things actually play out in reality.
That's true. I mean, Dr. Fryer makes the point in his editorial that with a focus on MEI, you'll actually get diversity. The kind of diversity that you're talking about is not inherently bad. But, it's the definition. I spend a lot of time at Google, and, Google is a very diverse place. There's all different kinds of people from all different parts of the world.
Right.
But it doesn't satisfy the diversity as defined by someone that embraces DEI.
Well, what's interesting about the diversity component of DEI, it's often ideological diversity. There isn't. Like, you must conform to a particular worldview. And oftentimes, from a skin color perspective, it's almost always related to race. And this is why it's so important to define what is it that these words actually mean, because underlying diversity, which we should all be for, actually, at least in the way DEI has historically been implemented, it's not about diversity at all. I mean, as you just said, Google, an incredibly multiracial, people from all sorts of backgrounds who all are hitting a particular expectation around merit and skill set, around technology development, and I think I would imagine that's what Roland is really talking about.
Correct. Yeah. And another reference point, he speaks to some research that Glenn Lowry and he performed, where it mathematically showed that merit policies of MEI maximize productivity and ensure against bias, which I think that's a powerful statement to make.
Right. And okay, so but tease that out. Why does it protect against bias if merit is the thing that matters most?
Well, because bias can take many forms. I think about you think about America before affirmative action. The workplace was incredibly biased against Jews, against white women, obviously against minorities, against Chinese, against Indian. There was very little focus on merit. I think sometimes when people think about the good old days, they sort of forget that merit was not a thing either. Jews couldn't go to Harvard, so they started Brandeis, right? I mean, it wasn't about merit. And so I think the point that Dr. Fryer makes is that by focusing on MEI, merit, excellence, and intelligence, you remove bias, whether it is in the form of male favoritism from the early parts of American history, or DEI quota bias?
So this is the thing that's always troubling, and I think you and I should work it through because I run schools, and it is a fact based on the nation's report card. Less than 20%. Let's focus on the issue of race. Less than 20% of Black kids are reading at grade level coming out of high school.
Yes.
That's unfortunately what the data says, right? And so no matter how much you pick it apart and you try to do affirmative action, we just don't have enough kids coming out of our K to 12 system, Black kids in particular, that can compete on equal footing, right?
Yes.
So it is quite possible to go to some of the best companies in the world, and if you are only selecting based on merit, almost by definition, you're going to end up with far fewer numbers of in this case, Black employees, right?
Yes.
So what do we do about that, right? I mean, it'd be interesting. Like, what do we say if we only focus on merit just by virtue of the quality of our education system? Will we get the richness of this diversity that everyone seems to be, trying to achieve?
Well, let me ask you this question, because the left would certainly say you both don't get it. And the problem is our schools are underfunded and there aren't enough resources. We need to spend more. We can solve this by spending.
Look, there's a ton of research on this. If any one of our listeners, Eric Hanishek is probably one of the leading researchers on the question of monetary resources and return on money. Look, we're having a conversation right now about the federal Department of Education, whether or not it should continue to exist. I think the numbers are that the federal Department of Education has spent more than $1 trillion over the time that it has been in existence, right? And that's just supplementary money to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars spent at the state level. And the needle hasn't moved. In fact, not only has the needle not moved, in some instances, the needle
It's moved.
in New York City, it's sometimes the numbers are moving, but it's around $35,000 per kid that's spent.
Student.
I mean, you can get a good private school education for that kind of money.
Sure can.
And, continues to be less than 50% of all kids in New York City are reading at grade level. And in certain demographic groups, it's even lower. And it's
it's sort of broken record, but as you peel back the envelope or the banana or the onion on this matter, TV viewing, participation in sports, the amount of time listening to music, the amount of time spent on homework. It's really not that complicated, and the data is very clear.
Right, 100%. If you look at, there are actually studies on this. There's the time the time lapse study. Asian kids, the number of hours spent studying. If you look at no other indicator, just
Yes.
look at that one single piece of data
Yes.
versus every other indicator, and you'll see there's a huge correlation between quality of academic outcomes. And so this DEI MEI thing, it's my frustration with something like DEI, which is why I'm excited by merit, but we have to be prepared. Like, if we truly are going to go by MEI, then we've got to be prepared. It's going to take some time to get not just Black kids, but a whole host of kids up to the point where they're actually operating on equal footing. Because otherwise, all we're doing is what I call back end band-aids, right? Back end band-aids where you're trying to solve a problem way down here when, frankly, you should have addressed this far earlier in the lives of our kids.
Yes. Well, I really like the way you frame that. And what popped into my mind as you said it is admissions at MIT. MIT removes, let's just call it, DEI from the admissions process. And, year over year, we go from let's call it 12% black to 5% in 1 year. That's the point you're making, that in moving to so-called merit, because there's a lot of ways to define merit even, but
Right. Yep.
merit, there's implications that we have to understand. And then, are we going to give up trying to deal with, as you said, the root cause, the upstream issues that are driving that 20% number that you just talked about?
That's the thing. Are we ready to have that conversation? Because the DEI, I mean, he's absolutely right. Of course, every society, every business, every organization wants to be populated by a group of people who are operating on all cylinders, right? They know their stuff. They've got the right attitudes. They're team players. Like all of this is part of intelligence, excellence, merit. But what we as a society, although I hate to say that, but our schools aren't yet where they need to be. Our
Yeah.
families aren't yet where they need to be in terms of the family structure that supports kids the most. And we just have to have that honest conversation. What I find often in the kind of the DEI conversation is that we're kind of trapped in, why aren't there equal representation? This is the other thing. Why isn't there equal representation of the number of partners at Goldman Sachs? Why doesn't that exactly equal the number of, black or women in society? And if it doesn't equal, then you're a racist organization or you're a sexist organization. That's where I think people have kind of had it with DEI as a principle, as an operating principle.
And can we just quote or misquote, which I will do, Professor Soul here? You're expecting equal outcomes in societies when in a family of three or more kids who eat the same food, who are raised in the same household, who sometimes wear the same clothes, you don't get equal outcomes. That's a joke.
It is a joke. It is a joke. But for the people who carry the DEI baton, they can't drop it.
No, they can't.
This is the thing. You know, it's so ingrained in their identity. Talk about identity politics. Like we often talk about identity politics in the concept of race and gender, but there's a DEI identity.
Yes.
And for a lot of people, that's it. They can't. Any disparity must mean discrimination.
Well, and as you said it, and many of our guests have said it, it is a religion with,
It's
with
religion.
all the aspects of religious furor and the demands of being a faithful follower.
Yeah, and the thing is, so when you and I have this conversation, there'll be people who watch it and say, as you said before, we don't get it. You don't really care. You have your own whatever anti-black racism, self-inflicted. It's like that's a projection, right? Like that. Are you actually interested in solving the problem? There was a Coca-Cola a couple of years ago. It was right in the midst of the George Floyd aftermath, of which there was a lot of fervor. A lot of companies said we got to do something. We got to do something. Their general counsel at the time, who was black, he said, from this point forward, any law firm that wants to do business with Coca-Cola has to have these numerical quotas. And basically, I think it was 30%. Any law firm had to have at least like 30% black lawyers or female lawyers. So, but he was basically putting numerical thresholds. If you wanted to do business with Coca-Cola, that was a deal. And then, of course, what happens? The most highly talented black lawyers, there was like a war, right, to pay those people even more. Like the black lawyers who were already doing extremely well, now we're suddenly getting huge job offers by these law firms that wanted to now employ, because that was their ticket to getting more business at Coca-Cola. Did that action increase the total population of qualified black lawyers or other minority lawyers into the profession?
No.
No, right? It's one of these things where you come up with these ideas, you think this is it, you know, and you pat yourself on the back, but you've actually done nothing to solve the problem. And in fact, in some ways, you've made it worse because it just seems cynical.
I have to referencing George Floyd. I have to tell a quick story. So after the George Floyd events, at his murder and the events that followed, I had two people call me. One, the CEO of a major technology company, basically apologizing to me
Oh my gosh.
and saying, I should have listened to you, and we were at this company, and now I understand, and I want to do more. Heartfelt. I mean, and I was sort of like, well, it's
Right.
not that bad. It's then I had another friend who's not even American, who works at one of the great technology companies of the world, call me and literally apologize. I'm so sorry. And I said, well, Greg, excuse me. I said, well, it, you don't have to apologize. And quite honestly, things are better than the narrative that's being presented today. But it was just, I mean, two obvious observations. These are people that really care, and they don't know what to do with that
Right.
caring energy. And so
Right.
your point about that lawyer, the general counsel at Coca-Cola, he cares. I don't doubt that. But what he does with that caring energy,
Yeah.
it's a challenge.
Well, and the thing is, what it becomes, and this is where, again, where DEI, I think people have just gotten tired of it. It's all performative.
You're right.
In education, just give you another example of how this ideology plays out. The New Jersey Board of Education, every state for many years had some assessment that was used to determine whether or not a kid had done what they needed to do to graduate from high school, right? Like in New York State, it's the Regents. You have to score a certain amount on the math exam, on the science exam, on the English exam to demonstrate proficiency. Now, because of DEI, many states are actually abandoning that
Horrible.
end of graduation assessment. So the MCAS in Massachusetts has just been eliminated. The Regents
Horrible.
are going to be eliminated in New Jersey, but in New York. But in New Jersey, they were unhappy with the percentage of minority kids that were performing at grade level. I mean, performing at a level to graduate from high school. And so rather than say, wow, what should we be doing to better the education leading up to 12th grade? They said, let's just change the cut score on what a kid had to perform, right? So under the old cut score in New Jersey, about 39% of kids would have proved that they met the criteria for graduation. Under the new cut score, it's 80%.
Incredible.
So voila, like
Problem solved.
student achievement solved, right? So that's where people have just had it with DEI. It's not, we all care, but can we be honest?
Well, Ian, let's be honest about even the mentality of someone that thinks that's the right thing to do. I don't know what your view is in terms of the percentage, but there is a high percentage of these progressive DEI led individuals who I don't think actually believe that Black people are capable of ever
Mhm.
performing at a level equal to Asians, let's say. I don't think I don't know what the percentage is, but I think
Yeah.
it's more than 30%.
Wow. It's one of these things that's hard to prove or
Right.
disprove, right? And I like to believe that people are disillusioned or they're well intended but just disillusioned as to what they're because on one level it's easier to ascribe evil intention or they just don't they fundamentally believe that certain groups of people are mentally inferior. Yes, there's always going to be some component of that, But I have to believe most people, if they understood, if they understood the conditions that are necessary for human flourishing, and especially if they've experienced it themselves, where they've been able to be successful, if they've been able to
Yeah.
take advantage.
See, that's the problem with that's the problem. So many of these people, for example, the mayor of Boston, who, you know, she is a poster person for
Oh my God.
DEI in so many ways. But yet you look at her life, a life of achievement, of hard work, of sacrifice, but yet she doesn't think those principles should apply to X other people. And just, one point, I don't consider those people evil, actually. I think it just misguided. I don't think evil is sort of, black IQ is this. These people will never be able to reach any level, so they should just stay in low, small jobs. I think the people that say, "Oh, this test is racist and thus
Yeah.
unfair," I think I don't think they're racist or evil. They are horribly misguided and
Yeah.
twisted in their ideology, which I
And
think is different than evil.
no, I think you're right. And no amount of evidence evidently can change their mind,
That's exactly right. That's
right?
exactly right.
Because it's not as if there are no successful, you know, black people or Asian people or, and by the way, there are lots of unsuccessful white people who
Correct.
suffer from a lot of the same pathologies that have impacted certain
Correct.
communities, right? So maybe it's much more about, do you have access to high quality education? Do you have school choice? Are you coming from a family that is relatively stable, generally a married two-parent household? Do you have access to a religious faith or live by some kind of moral code? Like these, do you have a work ethic? Do you study? These are the kinds of attitudes and behaviors that we need to be pointing to versus these stereotypical traits. And again, I think Dr. Fryer is right. Like DEI, his very thing, DEI is dying, but it's dying not because I think most good-hearted people don't care about these things. It's just
Right.
that DEI in its implementation has been incredibly divisive, exclusionary, and intolerant, of ideas,
100%.
of favoring groups one over the other, like the oppression Olympics, as I call it. Who's more victimized than the rest, and then there's this whole idea that victimhood, there's power in victimhood. You know,
The other thing that excites me about MEI is that it's occurring in 2025. I think America is uniquely prepared for
mm,
MEI today. If a prior episode we talked about the Moynihan report from 60 years ago. MEI would not have worked 60 years
interesting,
ago. There was too
interesting.
much discrimination, too much bias in the system. But 60 years later, we're in a place where MEI really can deliver.
From your lips to God's ears, we definitely are. But will the people who is it, Obama that said, who cling to their guns and all these things, talking about one, splashing one set of narratives on one group. Can the group that clings to the narrative of DEI, will they allow that to be true, what you just said? That we're ready, that we're receptive.
Well, Gavin Newsom has turned the corner on men competing in women's sports.
You know,
So,
the motivation to run for president certainly can. It's amazing how that can help you come to a set of common sense views.
I think a percentage will never change. When I look at, quite honestly, how people are trying to position Elon Musk and his work with the federal government, and I hear people talk about he's dumb, a
Yeah.
luck billionaire. He's only successful because who he knows. It's all about his network. Like you can never get through to these people.
Yeah.
They will never, they
Yeah.
will never change.
Yeah. It is sad. It is sad. I mean, to look at, I mean, just to take him for an example, you talk about
Right.
merit, excellence, and intelligence. Think about the number of companies that he actively leads. I mean, we
That
hear
are
about
industry leading companies.
yes, exactly. I mean, we talk about SpaceX, Tesla, X,
Starlink.
but you're right. Starlink, Neuralink, the Boring Company, the artificial intelligence company. I mean, and these aren't just kind of peripheral things that he's kind of, sits as the, some honorary board chair position. Like he's actively engaged.
And just to make the point, as if this is easy to do, the founders of Google have attempted several other initiatives. Larry Page had an initiative called Kitty Hawk, which was basically flying cars. He just shut it down. It's
Mm,
hard,
it's hard.
in spite of having success in one area, to go from cars to rockets to telecommunications to brain implants. I don't think it's ever been done. And yet, these politicians will stand up there and tell them, go back to South Africa.
Yeah, I know.
It's just so, no, to answer your question, no, some segment they will never come off the horse.
And there's hostility to merit, right?
Yeah.
So MEI, as what everyone should be embracing, you're telling me that every pilot is, demonstrating the top of their class, or doctor? Shouldn't we all want that? And again, by saying that doesn't mean you're inherently saying you don't want a racially diverse or economically diverse, but merit's got to be the standard. And then my point always, let's ensure we have an education system
Yes.
that is driving everyone up so we are competing on equal footing.
Yes.
We just need the patience to get there. And that's, for me, that's the thing. When we talk about MEI, we have to signal that, what is the arc of the universe is long and it bends towards justice. It will bend ultimately to the kind of world we all live in. But we got to take some time to rebuild generations of young people in particular that have not gotten the supports for whatever reason, right?
Yes.
Sometimes it's structural, sometimes it's family structure, sometimes it's geography. But in order to get our country back on track where everyone's really got an equal shot, that's going to take some time. So MEI is the right goal. And we just have to be a little patient, urgent,
Mhm.
but recognize that trying to fill holes on the back end, these back end band-aids, is not the solution.
It's a great way to start to wrap this episode. My only fear of an MEI is, will people still do the informal things that really matter? So I'll just, I'll make an extreme example. So if a non-white or a black young person from not an Ivy League school, but who's incredibly talented, has a 4.0, is doing all the right things, if he reaches out to find a mentor somewhere who doesn't look like him, will that mentor still take him on?
Yep.
This isn't about giving someone a job or establishing a quota, but whether it's Elon Musk, Larry Page, Larry Ellison, they all got a hand up. Steve Jobs, they all received opportunities. Doors were open to them that they walked through. We can't throw, I think Glenn Lowry's kind of suggested this in some of his recent podcasts. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, DEI needs to go, but let's not lose the spirit of cooperation and kindness that is important for a fully functioning society.
Yeah, and by the way, that applies to all humanity.
That's right.
Black kids, white kids, I mean, one of the reasons, like, for example, race-based affirmative action was deemed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, a couple of years ago, which I think was the right decision, especially when you look at the data from the Harvard and UNC cases. But my
Yes.
point is, you do have to have some mechanism to, if there are 500, I'm making up numbers, if there are 500 seats of freshmen in the Harvard class and there are 35,000 people applying, how do you decide? And what I've said is, if there has to be preferential treatment, then use economic class, right?
Yes,
The idea is that I think most Americans believe that if there are strivers out there and they're really working hard to make it, then kids from more impoverished backgrounds, I think most Americans would say, yeah, that's part of the American dream, right?
agreed,
Your station in life at birth doesn't have to be where you end up.
agreed.
And but it's merit based, but it starts with merit. It starts with merit. We got to get there. Um, and it's just going to take a little time.
Very good, Ian. Well, a fun conversation, an important conversation, and one that we'll be monitoring day by day, week by week.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Nike, as always, great to see you. Thanks everyone for listening to another episode of The Invisible Men. If you'd like to see other episodes, just go to www.invisible.men, or you can go to wherever your podcasts, Apple, wherever podcasts are
Spotify,
shown.
you name it.
There you go. Spotify, all of them. There you go. Excellent. Until next time. See you soon.